Welcome to the Circulation of Water, a multidisciplinary experience. My name is Ratajczak-Krajka, and I'm the head of the Ethnography Department of the National Museum in Gdańsk, who is hosting today's meeting. Firstly, I would like to introduce the Deputy Director of the Museum, Waldemar Elwart.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to warmly welcome you all. It's really great to see you here together in the same time and in the same place. As Anna said, my name is Waldemar Elwart. I'm a Deputy Director of National Museum in Gdańsk. And over past few years, as a part of the project Shelter Climate Migration Heritage, we have been looking closely at how climate change and migration are influencing and may continue to influence cultural heritage and the ways it evolves. But today we are starting the second stage of the project, Circulation of Water. It grows out of our work over the last 5-6 years, and our shared concern and our desire to find different ways to responding to the many changes we are experiencing in today's world, climate-related, migratory, cultural, and technological. And the project also built on the study visit to Iceland in 2025. And last year we had conversation with our friends from Herring Era Museum in Siglufjörður and in Norwegian House of Regional Museum of Snæfellsjökul in Stockholm. And together we wanted to develop a shared way of presenting the work of young Polish artists from the Academy of Fine Arts in Gdańsk. And we also invited outstanding Polish researchers and scholars from different fields to join to our project, so that we could look at those issues from the many perspectives as possible. And thanks to research and knowledge base of an even stronger inspirations to the young artists. And those artists, inspired by Polish and Icelandic folk culture, untouchable heritage and traditional crafts, and by the changes of climate change, have been invited to create the audiovisual performance. And now I would like, maybe not invite, but Anna Ratajczak-Krajka, you know, and Anna is, as she told you, is a curator of ethnographic department, and she will tell you more about it, about today's meeting and about the project as a whole. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. For me, it's also a great pleasure to gather scholars, museum professionals, artists, researchers from different countries and different disciplines to reflect on water, not only as physical substance, but as an ecological force, a cultural medium, a political matter, and more than human relation. So today we will explore water through anthropology, marine biology, ecology, philosophy, art, and museum practice. We hope that together our speakers will take us from freshwater ecosystems in Poland to tidal fishing traditions, from melting glaciers in Iceland to coastal heritage museums and contemporary art practices. I would also like to warmly welcome students from the Academy of Fine Arts mentioned by Waldemar, Academy of Fine Arts in Gdańsk, who are joining us today as listeners and observers. We hope that this webinar will inspire you to challenge your perspectives and give you new ideas for the future projects and for the project that we are all are dealing with now. So let me briefly introduce the program. We will begin with Dr. Małgorzata Zofia Kowalska, who will invite us to rethink conservation through the lens of Stoneworth meadows and modern human interdependencies. Then we will invite Dr. Aleksandra Zgrundo, and she will take us to Puck Bay in the Baltic Sea, sharing a powerful story of environmental degradation and ecological recovery. Then Magdalena Kowalska will present stone tidal weirs as a meeting point of tradition, ecology, and culture heritage. Then we are planning a short break, and after that, we will warmly welcome Ole Martin Sandberg, who will explore glaciers as socio-ecological assemblages shaped by accumulation, ablation, and unequal global histories. Then Vena Naskrecka will reflect on water through contemporary art, justice, and modern human relations. Following another short break at about 12:20, Anita Elefsen will present the Herringera Museum in Siglufjörður as a case study of maritime heritage shaped by water. And finally, our last speaker, Hjordis Paltotir, will introduce the Norwegian House and the Library of Water, connecting history, climate data and art, and glacial memory. We hope to conclude at about 1 o'clock with a short summary and a farewell. So let us begin our shared journey through the many, many circulations of water. Now I will introduce the short biography of Dr. Małgorzata Zofia Kowalska, our first speaker. So it is my pleasure to introduce her, a social anthropologist and assistant professor at Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań. Her research focuses on human-environmental relations and on rethink conservation beyond human-centered frameworks. She's particularly interested in understanding landscapes and protected areas as modern human worlds co-created by many forms of life. So let us begin our webinar.
Thank you, Anna, for this nice introduction. Please let me know whether you can see the screen. Okay, thank you. Yes, thanks again. Thanks for having me. Thank you for the introduction. I'm very happy to participate in the webinar that discusses water as life rather than as a resource. And today I would like to present like a brief summary of the research that I conducted at Lake Niedzięgiel, which is based in central Poland. And the research we conducted there is anthropological research. So we mainly talk to people who live around the lake or visit it very often. And I'm going to tell you the story about this lake, which is a very transparent fresh water and hard water lake inhabited by stonewort meadows. And I'm going to tell you a few words about stoneworts in a moment. And I'm going to do that in a hope to inspire you to pay attention and recognize the life that sustains and co-creates the places that you hold dear and you find important. This photo shows the lake that I've known for 20 years, and it's part of Natura 2000 program, so it's protected under the Habitats Directive. That's a European directive that operates within Natura 2000 program. It's also a very popular destination, tourist destination. In the past, it was referred to as Polish Ibiza because of the resort center that is located on one of the shores of the lake that used to host a very large parties during the summer. And during the summer, still the center hosts even thousands of visitors during holiday weekends. However, it's also a drying lake, one of the few in the region that are currently under both anthropogenic pressure, so under human activity, changing due to climate change as well. And because of that, it is also a reason that a lot of attention is paid to this lake and others in the area. Okay, I hope you can see the next slide now. And at the beginning of the century, an Australian philosopher coined this very lovely term to describe the way we feel when the places that we hold dear and we find important deteriorate. The term is solastalgia. You see it here on the slide. So as I said, it is a term introduced to or proposed to refer to the sense of unease and loss that we experience when environments that we used to call home, or we still call home, and they used to provide comfort and stability and meaning to us, deteriorate. And this is what I experienced. This is what I've been feeling when visiting the lake. As I said at the beginning, it's been important for me for the last 20 years. And while I was observing how it's changing, I was wondering who is responsible for those changes, who is actually taking care of this lake. And I wanted to know, as an anthropologist, what other people think about those changes, whether they notice them, what sense they have in this place, or they feel in the place under such dramatic changes. And I also wanted to ask them whether they know anything about the ecology of the place, whether they know anything about how the lake is protected, and who they think is responsible for protecting this lake. So I applied for a grant, and we conducted research among the residents and long-term visitors to the lake. And as you see, the lake is part of Natura 2000 program. So it's also one of the, or it's a habitat, meaning a home to stonewort meadows. You see the full name of the habitat with the code on the slide. And stoneworts are one of the reasons the lake is protected. They are very ancient and complex algae that are somehow, sometimes by many people, described as plants. And if you go through literature, they are very often called neither algae nor plants. And in hard water, freshwater ecosystems, such as Lake Niedźęgiel, they form those dense meadows, like huge populations of different stoneworts that are considered bioindicators and ecosystem engineers. They are bioindicators because when you have a lake with stonewort meadows, it kind of tell you that this ecosystem is in a good condition. But as I said, they also engineer the place. This is the name which is given to those species that actually engineer the ecosystem they live in. And you can read here that they act as carbon sinks. They store carbon and other nutrients at the bottom of the lake. They also encrust calcium carbonate and phosphorus in their bodies. So when they die, they lock the nutrients, including carbonates, at the bottom of the lake. They produce enormous amounts of oxygen. They provide shelter and food for many organisms. And because of these characteristics and the functions they have, you actually prevent algal blooms. So when we or you think about algae, you usually think about the phytoplankton or a cyanobacteria that grows and blooms on the lake. And stoneworts, being more plant-alike, they actually prevent those blooms to happen in the lakes where they have those big populations, communities known as stonewort meadows. And by people who work with stoneworts, they are very often compared to coral reefs. And they do not resemble seaweeds, although this is the name that is usually given to them by people who rarely ever notice them in the lake. So, okay, I'm going to get back to that in a second. But what I want to stress now is that they engineer the ecosystem. So they need the water to be transparent, so the light, the sunlight, could reach the bottom of the lake. So they could perform photosynthesis. But they also enhance the state of the ecosystem. So they literally make the water clear and transparent. So they thrive in the clear waters of the lake while also sustaining the system, the ecosystem. And this is one of the reasons this lake has been so popular among tourists. And as you can see on the next slide here, it's been a tourist destination since the mid-20th century. You see a slide which is a photo, a postcard, which was taken in the early 60s and another one in the mid-70s, I think. And this is how this tourist center that I mentioned at the beginning is located. This is the place that is hosting thousands of guests during the summer. And it used to be only houses owned by state companies, and you would have state companies workers coming to visit this place during the holidays with their families. And after 1989, most of those buildings were privatized. Some of them were sold to people who used to come there during summers. They now have their summer houses there, and they come every summer to visit the lake again with their children and grandchildren today. Many of them were rebuilt, and now they are rented for visitors who would come to the lake during weekends mostly. Around the lake, you would have a lot of newly built summer houses, sometimes all year, or second houses are, as they are called now. And people who would come there for decades would be the people, the informants, the partners that we talked to during the project. So we did not talk to those people who would come there only for a weekend. We only talked to people who are regular visitors, who known, we thought, the lake for decades. And when we talked to them, we realized that none of them actually know about stoneworts. So despite them being the engineers of the lake, making the lake transparent and clear, no one around the lake actually knew about it. And all the stoneworts were in the past used as fertilizers. So people would use them to fertilize the fields, the soil around the lake and in other places around the world. Here, there was no memory of such use, of such relation with stoneworts, and people did not really know what they do in the lake. They did not know much about the ecology of the lake as such. They did not know, I think, anything about the programs that, conservation programs that were operating around the lake, or they had a very limited understanding of what is being protected and in what way it's protected. So despite coming to this lake, because of it being so transparent and clear, they did not really know what is making it so special and so specific. Of course, they've been people, some of them who would work, maybe not in conservation, but their work have been kind of related to the ecology, and they would know a bit more about conservation programs. Some of them would hear the name stoneworts, or they would know there is this plant in the lake that is making the lake clear, but they were exceptions. And most of those who would have this very strong relation with the lake, coming there for decades, had very limited understanding of the system. And I would argue it's due to how conservation generally works, how it operates, it's usually a top-down management of the habitat, and not necessarily even the habitat itself, but rather how people use it, so how people relate to this specific place. And as such, it does not really require people, it does not require the local community to know the environment, to know the ecology of the place, to understand what's happening in this specific place. In fact, when I've been doing my research and I talked to some ecologists, and I was at time frustrated that I do not know something, they would tell me that I do not have to, because they are those natural scientists who know and take care of the place, and that's their job to know what's happening in the environment. But I think that's part of the problem, or that's even main problem, when we think of how we relate to environments and how we and whether we are responsible for those environments. And instead of talking about conservation or conserving an object, which, as you can see here, remains distant and separated from people's lives, we can think about how we care about the environment. So rather than talking about controlling and mastering the word, we can think about how we pay attention, how we are being attentive to the environments that we hold dear, that we think are important to us. Care is about engagement and relationships, and about dwelling, as anthropologist Tim Ingold said. So through engaging in the specific environment and learning about the relations that builds this specific environment, we learn that we depend on this environment and other beings that co-constitute the specific ecosystem. And it's not for me to say that we should abandon nature conservation. It's more like a proposal to kind of broaden it, to make it more democratic, to think about how we as a society can be more responsible towards the environments that we find important, we now see deteriorating and changing. And speaking of caring for a place, rather than conserving the ecosystem, helps us to challenge the division between nature and culture, and to focus on building relations of recognition and belonging. And recognition situates us, making us feel less alienated, more grounded, and connected to the earth, connected to the place that is, as you can see on this slide, created not only by humans, right? So once we recognize stoneworks as engineers of the place, we learn that we depend on them. But you might think of any other being or any other population community that is important in this specific environment, in this creating, making this specific place possible. The stonewort meadows sustain the lake's transparent waters, which are essential for them to thrive, and are also important for people who visit or live by the lake. Right, so they come to the lake because it's transparent, and once they recognize the reason behind this transparency, right, they might start thinking about how they relate to this lake in a different way and what they do at this lake, viewing stoneworks as engineers of our shared environments rather than disregarding them as someone else's concern, so conservationists' concern, should prompt us to adjust our plans and values to support their survival, right? So we should think about the plans for growth, or how we can develop tourism in this specific location. We know that it shouldn't be Polish Ibiza or any like loud and major tourist resort. It should be aligned, adjusted in the way that it actually makes stoneworks thrive in this specific environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Aleksandra Zgrundo. She's a marine biologist at the University of Gdańsk, specializing in ecology and taxonomy of algae. Her work combines environmental mentoring, restoration practices, and applied marine science. She is also a co-founder of Oficina Baltica, a company focused on marine environmental mentoring technologies. So we are warmly welcome, and the floor is yours.
Yes, I would like to tell you the story of plant communities in Puck Bay. Yes, with focusing on not only on plants, but also on people, on the sea, and on the hope I have to, associated with the recovery of the place of my interest. Oh. Yes. So a few words about me. I am, as was said, I am a marine biologist, but also I feel like marine more now even than ever. I'm more like ecologist because I observe the environment itself. Not only in the previous years, I conducted different kinds of research on microorganisms, mostly plant microorganisms like diatoms or green algae. But with time, I've moved to laboratory, and then again I come back to the environment to observe algae, but also rooted plants. And yes, to start the story, I would like to set the details. I mean, I think it's worth to show where is Puck Bay, and I hope you see the arrow. Here is Iceland, and here is the Baltic Sea and the Gulf of Gdańsk, and especially Puck Bay, which was always very rich in diversity, rich in plant and animal organism environment. And the history I want to, which I am telling, I want to start to go back to 50s or earlier, because the Puck Bay those days was really clean, pristine environment with very low eutrophication. I mean, this was oligotrophic basin, and with nourishing with plants and animals. Recently, I read even that on 1 square meter, you could count over 20,000 animals and over 1,600 plants. So it was really rich. And for the sea, it's typical that you have different levels of organizations, and you can observe plants and they are covered by different other plants, and they are covered by animals, and so on, so on. So it was possible actually to have such a rich communities, both plants and animal. And I also put here some pictures to show you how rich it was, but actually those pictures were taken in coastal area, so maybe they don't show this full richness. But yes, believe me, trust me, during the reference conditions, during not further than 80 years ago, we had really nice environment there, which was described by in very important for my story publication, Resources of Frucellaria fastigata in Puck Bay, estimated by means of diving method. This research was done by Maritime Fishery Institute in Gdynia, and between 1956 and 1959. And what was shown, actually, yes, the main tools which were used were diving methods. People, it can sound strange, but divers were towed behind a boat, and it was the first method used. So they just observed the bottom and chose sites which were the most important, the most interesting for scientists. Then divers came down to the bottom, and in special frames, 1 by 1 meter, they took everything out actually and counted and analyzed what's in. So from the pictures they took, we can create a visualization, which I made for you on the right, how the bottom was covered with a quite dense algal mats. Because why algae are here? Because it was a very nice environment, not only for Zostera marina, for eelgrass, as I will mention in a few minutes, but also by algae, mostly Furcellaria lumbricalis, which is in English named cloud forkweed, in Polish widlik, and bladder wrack, Fucus vesiculosus, in Polish morszczyn. So those two algae were dominant, and let's say they were a resource which was used later. But now I would like to show you, yes, the range of occurrence of all this algae. You can see that it was quite a nice part of the Gulf, nearly a half of. And yes, that's why when the history of exploitation starts. So after those studies, which finished in 1959, it was but scientists said that, okay, we have 11,500 tons of Furcellaria, and we can produce about 560 tons of agar or alginic acids, which were worth about 280 million Polish zlotys those days, which after recalculating made nearly 900 million Polish zlotys, which is nearly equal to 192 million euro. So it was a quite nice sum of money, I suppose, for people that governed our country those days. So it was decided, yes, we start exploitation. And in 61, between 61 and 1965, there were obtained 3 patents for producing agar and alginic acid. In 1961, in Puck was established seaweed processing plant. So the story was getting quicker and quicker. It is said that scientists established a safe limit of exploitation for 3,000 of biomass per year. And between 1963 and 1969, about 4,000 tons of widlik, Furcellaria and Fucus were exploited, which was to make about 35% of resources. But the exploitation stopped very quickly. After 11 years, it turned out that the reduction of biomass was so high that it's not economical to exploit those resources anymore. And what was also stated that the levels of metals were dangerous to human life. So yes, with such, let's say, evidences, no one discussed. And here I have a short statement of anonymous observer of actually, it was a person who was involved in maybe not in exploitation, but on observations, how much resources and where are those resources. And this person, actually, I think it's very important because he put attention to 2 facts. First, that the exploitation looked like it was very dangerous to environment because underwater, the bottom looked like a trace of a combined harvester picking grain and planting potatoes. So we can assume that it was, yes, very let's say, it ruined actually the bottom and everything was on it. And the second thing, we didn't think about the environmental impact of this overharvesting. So there was no biological, ecological awareness what could happen. But yes, we need to think that, to remember that those days probably people didn't see how looks the bottom after dredging. Now we have evidences. Here are some pictures made by Howard Wood from Aran Island. And you can see that before we have a nice rocky bottom covered by plants. This is the picture most left, and after dredges were used, there is nearly nothing on the bottom. Not only there are no desired organisms, in this case mussels, but also any accidental organisms. So yeah, I did also a visualization of bottom in the Putsk Bay because I knew that the dredges were used, but also harrows, like you can see on the bottom left picture. So those combination of those two tools could give a result, as you can see on the picture on the right. And what scientists observed in following years, it was that not only Furcellaria resources or meadows shrinked, and in 80s, actually there were no signs of Furcellaria. No one found Furcellaria for over 40 years, from 80s. And also other plants were destructed in a strong way, like Zostera marina, for example, or Fucus, or other plants. And those, here you can see that from 1957 to 1977, the disturbance was so high that only two small patches of Zostera marina meadows were left. And yes, next pressure. First, we had the pressure over-exploitation, but in next years came eutrophication, domestic pollution, industrial pollution. And now as here I put a nice film, I hope it's nice for you also, to show how, for example, refulation of sandy beaches looks like. That after in the water, you can see that the sand from the beach was moved towards the sea, and there is really nothing. Everything is covered by those nice sands. And now what we have, we can observe lots of problems also with plastic pollution, with tourism. So the number of pressures is going up, is increasing. But at the same time, we in Poland were put some measures to reduce those pressures, like, for example, sewage plants were built, the amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus were reduced from agriculture, for example, and so on. So what we see now, that some species, they return, especially species which I mentioned earlier, like bladderwrack or cloud forkweed, but also, for example, brody seaweed, which likes to be together with cloud forkweed. And on the maps on the right, you can see that maybe the number of sites, it's not huge, but for me it's very important that yes, we can observe those overexploited algae, and every year I go down under the water, I can see them in new places and in more and more numbers. So that's good. Here we have a stonewort, Para, for example, and I'm also happy to observe that those meadows are returning and are really, really rich and can serve as a nice nursery ground for fish and for other organisms. What we saw also recently, that seagrass meadows, they recover and they are coming back. Here is also a short film just to show you how it looks like. Those meadows are really beautiful, especially when they are, let's say, in their good conditions. This meadow, which you can see here, it functions very well. Okay, you have some algae on the bottom, but actually it looked like similar in old days, I mean, in those days of reference conditions. And yeah, I would like you also to show results of our study, which we ran last year, because the state of the Zostera meadows is so good, according to us at least, that we decided to transplant some Zostera from one station, which we called donor station, to other station, which was scare of Zostera. Actually, there was no Zostera at all. It was a site mostly sandy, and what we saw, yeah, let's say I show you some more pictures how it looked like. So we, from the donor side, we took some small plants and replanted them to other side, which was, as you can see, empty bottom. I have to say that we were very successful, because after 2 months, when we came back for monitoring, there were over 76% of plants in the sea, having new plants growing out. So yeah, I can say yes, it was success. It means that the environment is in good condition. I mean, the water is not polluted very much, and we can do some more to help the environment to rebuild. I hope that transplanting plants, they will take their role in the environment. As earlier Małgorzata said, the stonewort is a plant that is helping the environment to be clean. Also Zostera and other plants in our Puck Bay, they have exactly the same role. Yes, they keep the environment clean. I mean, clean of nutrients, clean of different kinds of chemical pollution, although nowadays there is no chemical pollution in this reservoir, trust me. And yeah, and it gives hope actually that our action could help the environment to go on this reference condition side. And yeah, from this story, I can show, and this story could be a hopeful example that, okay, people destroy the environment, but also the people know how to regenerate them. They can take proper measures to help the environment to regenerate. But what is important it is this environmental awareness, because I suppose that no fisherman would use harrow or overexploit if they knew that it will have such consequences as they cleaning the bottom. They also cleaned the environment from small animals and from fish, and the consequences we could observe for more than 40 years. So that's my message. And I hope, yes, that my presentation would help to and maybe to help you to bring any new ideas. But I would like also to have any nice feedback. How should I say the story about this to make people more aware, and how to make people to just to listen to scientists, not the media like LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever. So yeah, that's everything from me.
Oh, thank you very much. This was a story with a hope. So this is something that I think we need, and the storytelling method, well implemented into scientific research, and I think it's something that can be used also with our department and with the students. So thank you very much. So now my pleasure is to introduce our last speaker before the break. So Magdalena Nowakowska from the University of Warsaw, an expert of underwater ecology and protection of underwater cultural heritage. She has led coordinated international research projects and played a key role in developing the underwater ecology program at her university, now the part of the UNESCO UniTwin network.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me very well. Thank you for invitation to this webinar. It is my real pleasure to take you for a long trip from Pucka Bay to another part of the globe, to Kuwaiti Bay for the beginning, and after around the globe. Today, I would like to tell you about some kind of archaeological sites, and not only archaeological sites, but about some kind of stone structures, which we are calling stone tidal weirs. But in the beginning, because I am an archaeologist, I am a maritime archaeologist and underwater archaeologist, it's mean I'm not only digging, but as well I'm diving and digging under the water. I would like to tell you just you know, to know the rules. What is the underwater cultural heritage, which we are would like to take care of? According to the definition of UNESCO standards, underwater cultural heritage means all traces of human existence having a cultural, historical, or archaeological character, which have been partially, which is very important for us, or totally under the water, periodically or continuously, for at least 100 years, such as sites, structures, buildings, artifacts, and human remains. And what is the most important, together with the archaeological and natural context. It's mean, like my previous colleagues were talking about some nature, some plants, as well archaeology would like to keep the to be common with the natural context, which for us is very, very important. Of course, the well-known artifacts, the examples of underwater cultural heritage, it is some kind of vessels, aircrafts, other equals, and a part, therefore, the cargo or other contents, together with their archaeological and natural context, and object of prehistorical times, archaeological times. But as well, according to this definition, as we can see, that the objects which have been partially or totally under the water, periodically or continuously, we have the examples of fishing wire. It's mean sometimes calling as a fish guard or kiddle. It's mean the short name I like to use, that's fish traps. This fishing wires, it is a huge constructions built of stones in a tidal area. The most important is that they exist in the tidal waters, and they are used where or still are using for the catch certain fish and certain times of the year. And many extant examples remain and provide a tangible link to the sustainable fishing practice that have incorporated traditional ecological knowledge and the spirit world, providing balance and harmony for indigenous people for thousands of years. Why we are talking like this? Because this kind of methods for fishing, popular around the globe, it's very strongly connected with the moon calendar and with periodically catching fish, and with the ecology system, and with some kind of mystery and mysteries and religion. It's connecting people to live in some special kind of social models and in a special kind of social life. Today, I would like to present you shortly some my projects, because for me it's it's so easy to talk about what I'm to do, and after I would like to present the experience of my friends. In 2013, I start the project in Kuwait. I know it's long, it's far from here, but it's happened like this. That's in Kuwait Bay. In a small Failaka island, I start the project Waterfront and Underwater Archaeology of Kuwait, Archaeorisk on the coastal zone around the Failaka Island. And the Failaka Island is a small island, 14 by 10 kilometers, which is located in Arabian Gulf, well known as well as the Persian Gulf. And on this island is a treasure for the archaeologists, because we notice that people were living there from the second half of millennium BC until now, of course, but for several archaeological periods, Alexander the Great, late Islamic period until now. And for me, it was my task, it was my aim, it was to detect and describe remaining archaeological sites and the seashore in the tidal area, and provide, of course, documentary system and make all this archaeological documentation. Here you can see this Failaka Island. It's, as I told you, it is not a desert, it is a kind of savanna. And what is the most important, there is natural sources of fresh water, what was very important for the from the beginning for the people who used to live there. And our survey, we start from the place, from the based on the map prepared by our team in 2012. Based on this map, I start to watching around the island, and during the tidal times, it means during the water gun, it was low tide, I started walking around with my friends around Failaka Island, and until now we located there more than 30 structures which are in the tidal area, and most of them I don't know, maybe 29 or 28 are recognized as a stone tidal weirs. What is this structures? What is this construction? As I told in the beginning, it is the huge stone structures like walls, which making a barrier in the water, and people as a system of catching fish from that. As you can see here, there's several examples of the stone tidal wire located in the Failaka Island, and in different shape. It can be a square shape, it can be rectangular shape with a lot of elements. We have some kind of hook in the beginning, some pockets, some curves, some. Here you can see, for example, pockets, and it's making. When the tides is coming with everything, with the fish, with all the sea food, all this ecosystem inside, it's with the water, it's coming in. And when the tides is going out during the low tide, some of them they are stuck inside by the changing water circulation, and in that moment people coming inside and catching fish by different kind of tools. But it should be a huge society, not one person to have an economical potential. It should be made by a group of people. And some part of the structures, and you can see these walls are very strong. They are not. In the beginning, I thought that maybe some of them are strongly destroyed. Of course, some of them a little bit destroyed, but as well it is a system of gaps, which makes changing of water circulation, and this mainly fish, when they would like to escape from this trap, they are terrified by the circulation, and they are stuck on the bottom of the sea, and for people it's much easier to catch them in that time. Why it is ecological system? Because, as you know, it is regulated by the moon calendar as well by the climate. It's mean people catching fish only when the moon, during the full moon or the noon. That's during the half noon. It's mean during the most of the months. These structures are under the water. That's it's not working every day, but only partially several times during a month, and with the taking care about what they are catching and for what they are catching. How we know something about this? We collect an information from the local interview from the old people who are living in Failaka Island, and not only here, because there's not so many information in archives, but the most important for us is to collect information from the local people. We are observing all the seashore, not only shoreline, but as well this system of living on the island. And as you can see, some remains of the culture of fishing, like remains of fishing boat, and some system of site location of around the island. During my experience, it was for me a success to make 1.5 hour interview with one of the oldest guy from the Failaka Island who were still fishing, and it was for me possible to ask him 45 questions and to speak about the culture, about the system, and what is for me as well the most important, about religion and tradition. Unfortunately, this Muhammad Burbaya, which you can see on the picture, he passed away 4 years ago, and with him, that's why I'm so happy I have this interview, because with him, in my opinion, part of culture passed away as well. What is why for me it is so important? Because as I told you, it is the structures. It's not only a tool for fishing, but it is the structures of community. It is some kind of tools and practice. It's create the tradition of local indigenous people who are fishermen, who are living in islands, in the shorelines, in different parts of the globe, and making and just the professional techniques of fishing. For example, you can see some pictures of the fishing nowadays. It's pictures made by me. I was observing the behavior of people. Now the tradition of fishing in the stone tidal wire of Failaka Islands disappeared completely. It's disappeared in the end of 19th, beginning of 20th century, and people start to use a different kind of fish traps. But the system is almost very similar for this, what we have in a prehistoric time, what we had in a late period, what we had in a time where the stone tidal wires exist. And what we know from the parallels from the different kind of globe where the system is still working. That people use still the same techniques and the same tools, and it's mean that before they were using some kind of landing nets, some kind of fish nets made of the organic materials. Now, of course, they are using much more plastic and iron things, but the system is absolutely the same. And what they make with the fish, they are collecting fish and make choosing what they need. And those small fish are going back to the water. What is very important, they are taking care non-stop about ecological system, and they're taking care about base, and they're taking care about the future. And the tradition, you can see that's for fishermen who would like to try to go into the fish trap, to the stone tidal wire, but they don't know how to do it. This culture in Failaka Island completely disappeared, as I told you before, in the beginning of 20th century, when the social system changed completely from the huge group which were working as a professional fishermen, to the small system of family group. But by the way, this, for example, one of the fish stone tidal wire, you can see how huge is it. More than 100, about 200 meters for the 1.5 meters, and the bay is approximately 2.5 hectares. And it's not only that it is not only that stone tidal wires, because very strongly are connected some village, some sediments where people were living. And this model for using the stone tidal wires, it is that we have a lot of the structures in the sea, but on the shoreline we have as well fisher village with the mosque, with the houses where they were living, and with the fish processing area where they were preparing fish. As you know, fish is very delicate, very smelly, very we need to work it very fast. And if we have a organized short time for catching fish, because we can do it only with the full moon and noon, and during the low tide, it means this time is very, very short, that we need as well to processing this fish as well in a short time. There is no time to preserve it. Remember, that's the climate and this infrastructure in that time. It was not that perfect that they were processing, and for the local people who are living on the island, and for the economy and for the diets. It were several systems of protecting this fish. As well, you can see another structure in the neighboring bay. On this map, it is one bay and a neighboring bay that hold this area. Probably it was used by these people from the village. And you can think, okay, but for what that's so many fish they need? Because the group of people, I don't know, for example, 50, 80 maximum, but for every family, 2-3 fish a day, it's enough. Yeah, but what we have in another bay, we have a natural harbor, and this Fajlaka Island is strongly connected. It is the last of checkpoint on the sailing route from Indian Ocean to Mesopotamia, today Iraq. Probably it was one of the most important international harbor, which were used by local people for the changing foods. As well, this fish, as the best fish, it's going for the exchanging some goods as a money today, and some of them was as a diet for local people, and some of them because we have a climate of savanna, it is a dry climate, not enough rain, not enough water. It was as well for the animals, as a food for local animals, and like cows, for example, and camels, and of course to fertilize agriculture. That's the meaning of this fishing. It was not only diet, not only economical, but as well for the agriculture. It was very important in that time. As I told you, system changed completely in the beginning of 20th century, and people moved to the other part of the island and start to preparing very light fish traps. You can see this model on pictures it was made by family, fisherman family. That's only 4 or 5 person, or they need to prepare some kind of fish trap, and to catching fish from this for the trap, it was possible for 1 or 2 person. That the model of society completely changed, and as well the tradition disappeared. And according to my project, it's happened that I met some people around the world, and we start with the huge project, global project under the UNESCO nation, Indigenous People, Tradition, Ecological Knowledge, and Climate Change, the iconic underwater cultural heritage of stone tidal wires. Our director is Professor Akifumi Iwabuchi from Tokyo University, and my colleagues from Africa, Europe, Asia, and around the world. And we start to collecting information about people who are still using stone tidal wires, as well as archaeological sites. It is just to see how it's popular. It is not, I was talking to you about Failaka Island, but it is, you can find the stone tidal wires everywhere when we have a tidal area, when we have a not muddy area, we have a kind of bedrock on the bottom of the bay, and it exists with this indigenous people, and they are using it a lot. For example, it is the shoreline of Qatar, and you can see a lot of structures around. Nobody take care about this now. And this is a research of my friend, Professor Bill Jeffrey from University of Guam in Micronesia, who is who had a long research in with the local peoples, and he has a lot of information about the religion and the traditional things which happen according to the fishing, like for example, celebrate the night of the beach during the full moon, and the others tradition. And another examples, it is from Professor Akifumi Iwabuchi project, Tokyo University. Professor Akifumi Iwabuchi last years he spent time in the Timor-Leste Islands when he recognized that area. And what is important, that's the stone tidal wires in Timor-Leste are taboo. They are women, and they are located only in the north part of the island. And the most beautiful and the most well-known in the world, it is the huge, beautiful stone tidal wires from Taiwan, from Penghu Islands, when we have a double heart famous wire. But as well, we know it from the China, and as well we know it from South Africa, from Magda Mingizzi elaboration. Thus, as well, it is well known. Here you can see Western Japan, but as well we have it in Europe, in North Spain, with France, with Portugal, with France, Portugal, and I saw it as well in Norway, for example. That's and this stone tidal wires, this technique of fishing, it was well known from the stone period, from the whole prehistory until now. Sometimes it exists. And I would like to go back shortly to the Taiwan cultural heritage of stone tidal wires, and the most beautiful what nowadays the society doing with this. Sometimes they are still using it for catching fish, but it is just by hobby now, but not a traditional economic way for fishing. By how to promote this culture, how to promote this their heritage. They make from the stone tidal wire the most popular place for the wedding, because people who would like to get married, or after getting married, they're coming there to make a photo, like a double heart objects. It's been the most popular for the young couples to make a photo forever as a double heart. As well, they have now a lot of NGOs, people who protect the stone tidal wires, taking care about not only construction, but cleaning every day, after every tides, cleaning from the plastic, from the pollution, from the garbage, from everything, and making, and as well promote as it's possible this culture, this tradition, for preparing for kids, for people, for society, for excursion, a lot of things. You can see a lot of plastic things, all of them made from garbage. They organize special machine, and now products things from the garbage which they collected from the stone tidal wires. And of course, huge promotion of sea life around, and educational opportunities. And as well, what is the most important, and I like it so much, that they are using old people, old fishermen, as a deputy director and the main guide person in the local museums. They are teaching tourists, they are teaching kids how to use, about the tradition of the stone tidal wires. And the most amazing things, it is Taiwan, and it is one wetland area during the low tide. It is the one of the popular place for visiting for people, and thousands of people coming, really thousands of people. It is terrible traffic for that more than 10 kilometers to come to the wetlands, and whole families, young generation with a boombox sometimes coming to observing the nature, to observing small crabs which coming out from the mud. And this is, you can see what's going on, how to promote nature, how to promote ecological life, how to be common with our system, ecological system and climate. That's I would like to tell you about this because, of course, the same we have in Poland, but we haven't got tides. In the Baltic Sea, we haven't got tides, but the same techniques, maybe not similar techniques, came to the fish traps, which are using in our Pucka Bay, for example, in a different part of Baltic atolls and lakes, but a little bit different kind of tools of traps, but this kind of tools and traps, they never change shape or techniques according through the ages. I hope I inspire you this technique. Thank you so much. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, we have fish traps here in the museum in our collection, but no tides. So technique is different, but it was very interesting to hear about this unique heritage. Thank you all to all our participants. I would like to warmly welcome our first participant from Iceland, Ole Martin Sandberg, who is environmental philosopher at the University of Iceland and leader of the research project Climate Crisis and Affect. His work explores the relationship between ecology, society, history, and emotion, and he is currently writing a book on Icelandic nature from a process philosophy perspective.
So yes, I've called this talk Glacial Assemblages, and I will focus on the concepts of accumulation, ablation, and circulation. And as you said, I'm currently working on a research project called Climate Crisis and Effects, in which I'm gathering a network for people who are working on climate-related issues primarily in social sciences and humanities. And in that project, I've also been involved in, and this is how I got into this webinar, the first Rights of Nature movement in Iceland, which has been campaigning to get the glacier Snæfellsjökul recognized on the ballot for the last presidential election. Furthermore, the book you mentioned, Iceland is a Process, Nature Philosophy from the Land of Ice and Fire, where I take different elements of Icelandic nature, is part of the talk I will be giving today. The talk today will be some of the content that's in that chapter. So we will start in Iceland. And as you can see, the Snæfellsjökul, which I mentioned before, is located over here. But you can see we have a lot of prominent glaciers. Snæfellsjökul is covered by clouds in this satellite photo. The most prominent glacier, which you can always see on the maps of Iceland, is this one, Vatnajökull, which has a lot of smaller outlet glaciers. And that is the one I'll be using as an example here. It really doesn't matter which glacier we're talking about. Because when we look at a map of Iceland, we can see these big prominent areas of white. And my point is that a glacier is not just this geographical area, this white on the map. A glacier is so much more. A glacier is all the water that is running out from the glacier that forms rivers, that shape the ecosystems along its way. It shapes the landscape. And the water that runs out into the ocean shapes the coastline because it carries with it a lot of sediments, a lot of nutrients. And as you can see down in the bottom left, we have lobsters, which only live in Iceland. Lobsters only live in the area in the coastline south of Vatnajökull because it brings so much sediment that it shapes the coastline, so it's good for lobsters. That shapes the cultural life in the city of Höfn in Hornafjörður, also just south of the glacier, which has a lot of lobster-based culture. You know, there's a lot of lobsters you can buy in the restaurants, etc. It's famous for lobsters, and that is because of the glacier. The glacier carries, you know, when ice breaks off, you get icebergs, which the area is very known for having these beautiful icebergs that are slowly drifting out to sea. The cold water and the sediments and the nutrients come out into the ocean and shape the global ocean currents in various ways, shape the biodiversity in the ocean and the temperature of the ocean. So how far does the effects of a glacier reach is really an interesting concept. And like, I don't know, because we can trace the effects of a glacier further and further. We can also, so rather than defining a thing by just its geographical location, we should try to define it as the effects and its affects, as Gilles Deleuze talks about. A thing is not just whether it's an organism, it's a concept, it's a place. It's not just what we can see on a map. It's what affects it and what it affects. And this is part of central to what is called assemblage theory. And I would have liked to come up with the term glacial assemblages, but it is already being used in geology for the interaction between the glacier, the ice, and the land. So how the glacier and land interactions shape the landscape. It creates hills, it creates rivers and things like that. And here's a map of such a glacial assemblage. And what I want to focus on is the accumulation zone and the ablation zone, because glaciers are very similar to living organisms in that they are not static. They are continuously evolving, what's called metabolizing. They get nutrients in and they release nutrients once they have used them. So the accumulation zone is where snow accumulates in the winter. It gets pressed down over the many years, thousands of years, until it finally comes down in the ablation zone. Ablation means, you know, destruction or removal. So that's where it has a metabolic process, just like an organism that always has the mouth on top and it releases whatever it has used at the bottom because of gravity. What affects a glacier is, of course, it needs to accumulate. In order to stay the same size, it needs to accumulate enough snow that it matches what it releases in the ablation zone. So accumulation and ablation are rather important topics. And the snow circulates throughout the glacier until it reaches the ablation zone. The issue is not, the problem we have now is not that glaciers are changing, because glaciers are always changing, just like any other organism. The problem is that shift in balance between accumulation and ablation. We're ablating more than they're accumulating. The lack of accumulation of snow is related to the accumulation in the atmosphere. We all know that glaciers are melting because of climate change, and that climate change is caused by the accumulation of CO2 in the atmosphere. The atmosphere is also a constantly changing process. It consists of various different chemicals, mostly nitrogen and oxygen, that interact and react in various ways in different altitudes. Some of these reactions are quite fast, such as the ones affecting the ozone layer, which is why we managed to avoid that global crisis. But CO2 is different. Once it's added to the atmosphere, it hangs around for a long time, between 300 and 1,000 years. This means that every part that we emit will be added to everything we have emitted in the past, because it accumulates. Just like a glacier, what matters is not the rate of emission, but the accumulation. Even if we drastically reduced our emissions tomorrow, we would still have caused changes that will last for several generations. Accumulation is, of course, a term that originally was used in economics, more specifically about capital or wealth accumulation. And this graph shows the historic development in global income inequality in more or less the same period that saw the rise in carbon emissions in the atmosphere. So accumulation of wealth in certain people and accumulation of carbon in the atmosphere are at least historically correlated, and I would argue they are also causally connected. If we just change to a different graph from the same paper, we can see that this rise in income inequality was, at least in the beginning, primarily an income inequality between countries. So it's also the difference between countries start in the same period. So the accumulation of wealth starts in certain countries. And that is, of course, as I think we all know, connected to another global process, not just the birth of industrialism and capitalism, but also of colonialism. So once we have accumulation in one area, we will also have ablation in another area. Ablation meaning removal or destruction. So certain places were destroyed as wealth was removed from them and accumulated somewhere else. And we can see Andreas Malm documents that pretty well in his book Fossil Capital, about how capitalism and colonialism was connected to the discovery of fossil fuels. And it's still connected today, as is documented in this book about the imperial mode of living. We're talking so much about how we can make technological fixes that can solve climate change, but really climate change requires a change in our way of living that is no longer dependent on wealth extraction and ablation and accumulation. Now, if we move, this is all just politics, history, sociology, etc. But I want to talk about the circulation of water, not just within the glacier, but I've been thinking about, like, where does the water go when the ice melts? What happens to the glaciers besides the local impact? Because even the local impacts are difficult to measure. There's a risk of landslides as the ice melts, and the many rivers that feed from the glaciers might dry out, which will be a danger for our access to fresh water and the local ecosystems. But the cultural value is even more difficult to assess. A lot of life is built around the glaciers. Cultural memories, identities, and the aesthetic loss. How do we measure that? Furthermore, a glacier is not just the ice, as we've mentioned. The glacier affects all life around it. The sand that comes with the meltwater that shapes the coastline and creates a particular ecosystem, which is a unique home to certain species and cultural life, but it changes the water temperature and salinity, and it brings nutrients to the sea, etc. Furthermore, the glacial runoff is part of the regional and global ocean currents. So how far do these effects reach? We don't know. But we do know that when the glaciers melt, the water has to go somewhere. Accumulation in one place is always accompanied by depletion in another. As greenhouse gases accumulate in the atmosphere, glaciers get depleted. And as glaciers deplete, water in the oceans accumulate. One thing goes up, another goes down, and so on. We all know that rising sea levels is one of the consequences of climate change. And when the water goes up, some land areas go down. But interestingly, not all land areas go down. Just as the causes of climate change are not evenly distributed, neither are the effects. The land areas that are currently covered in ice are likely to rise when the weight of all that ice disappears. And this can have many tectonic and geological effects, such as earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. There's a lot we don't know. But what happens to the water, the ocean's levels, when the Icelandic glaciers melt? Many of us probably think that when you add water to the ocean, it distributes evenly across the globe, like when you fill a bathtub. But that's not the case. Scientists have been using satellites to track sea level rise. On average, the global sea levels rose rose by 1.8 millimeters per year between 2002 and 2014, and it's much more now. That might not sound like a lot, but we're just in the beginning of the melting of the large ice masses, and it all accumulates over the years. What is interesting is that the world ocean does not rise equally. The areas that are red in this illustration are the ones that saw the most increase. But interestingly, some areas, the ones in blue, actually see a decrease in sea level. And to make it more strange, the areas where the sea levels are lower are also the areas where the ice is melting and the water is deposited. Why is that? The answer is actually rather simple, and we all know it, but it's really hard to, it was fascinating to me still, even though it makes sense. The research project about the sea level rise was actually also a project aiming to map the Earth's gravitational fields. It turns out that gravity is not the same all over the planet. This graphic shows the difference in gravitational fields, with red areas having more and blue areas less gravity. This again has to do with accumulation, and it's really not that surprising once you think about it. We know that gravity is mass. Mass equals gravity, and there's different amounts of mass around the planet because, contrary to popular imagination, it's not really round as a ball. The more mass, the more gravity we have. Heavy objects pull water towards them, so you have higher sea levels in those areas. And guess what has a lot of mass and a lot of weight? Glaciers. When glaciers melt, they lose a lot of weight, and that doesn't only lift the land, but also shrinks the gravitational field around the land, which causes lower sea levels, at least relative to the global sea level rise. Another factor is that, contrary to popular belief, the Earth is not actually round. It's a spheroid, which is wider than it is tall. This is because Earth is spinning and matter is pushed off to the sides, away from the gravitational axis. Thus, water that melts near the poles tends to be pushed out to the middle of the belt, the equator. This reminds me of the philosopher Michel Foucault, who says that power is everywhere, not because it embraces everything, but because it comes from everywhere. We need to change our way of thinking from Earth and power and everything else having like a one center that controls everything. Power is distributed, so is water. This is not actually a new idea. More than 100 years ago, the scientist Peter Kropotkin, who also did work on glaciers and climate change, considered this a central idea in all of science. From astronomy to physics to psychology and political science, we had to change our concepts and our models from the idea of a central power to a process with many interacting forces. What all this means is that sea levels rise the most in the areas furthest away from the melting ice, more or less because there are other factors too. This means that a glacier like Vatnajökull has an important effect on life closer to the equator. In Iceland, we tend to not really think about what happens to things that go into the sea. They just disappear. But just because they're not in our sight does not mean they're gone. They show up somewhere else. And those areas might truly be Vatnajökull's ablation zone. So there's a causal connection between a melting glacier in Iceland and the existential threat to other island nations, such as the Marshall Islands, where this picture is from, or the Maldives. The water around the Marshall Islands is rising at a rate double that of the global average, and they might soon become uninhabitable or completely disappear. And this again shows how, especially when dealing with climate change, everything is connected. And to return to the issue of global justice, it's worth mentioning that the CO2 emissions per capita in the Marshall Islands is about 1/3 of that of Iceland. They basically contributed nothing to the global accumulation of CO2, but they're among the people who are going to bear the hardest consequences of it. Ultimately, though, our melting glaciers and the crisis of the Marshall Islands is caused by the same global process, that of uneven accumulation and depletion. We're not all equally at fault in it, and we will not all suffer the consequences equally, but we're all connected. Now I want to bring us all back home to Iceland again. And these are just some of the thoughts and associations I got when I was trying to sort of meditate on a glacier and trying to locate some of its effects and think about the circulation of water, power, consequences and effects and how they spread out throughout the global system. So even if you don't live in a place with glaciers, they affect you and you affect them. We're all connected in a global process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This global perspective was thrilling and very interesting. Okay, now our next speaker is Vena Naskrecka. She's an interdisciplinary artist working across movement, performance, installation, and socially engaged practices. She's currently based in Iceland. She combines artistic research with ecological thought, disability studies, and community activism. She's also the founder of the NGO focusing on inclusivity and creative community building. Sorry not to mention the name, but it's in Icelandic. So welcome warmly, Vena, and the floor now is yours.
I composed the presentation and text for this webinar with sometimes kind of obvious may seem questions, but the things that we often don't think about, but are actually quite important in a daily life and the future of the planet. So who owns the water? Locally, the answer differs by country, obviously. Water governance is shaped by national law, property systems, and environmental regulations. And yet water recognizes no borders. Rivers cross nations, groundwater flows beneath boundaries, and atmospheric moisture crosses nations, and it circulates globally. In Poland, water bodies mostly are state-owned. In Iceland, lakes and sections of rivers may be privately owned, and access to natural sites can be monetized. Even if one country protects its waters while another permits pollution, contamination still travels. The effort of one region can be undone by another. Water reminds us that ecological systems ignore political lines. Water circulates not only in rivers and lakes, but also deep within soil. Water reminds us that the effort that we apply, it really affects not only humans, but more than humans alike too. Legal borders shape our relationship to water, much like legal definitions shape disability status. A person recognized as disabled in one country may not be recognized in another. The body does not change, but rights do. Water flows freely, yet access is mediated by law, economics, and power. Anthropomorphism. In 2019, a funeral was held for Snæfellsjökul, the first Icelandic glacier declared dead due to climate change. The ceremony drew global attention because it translated ecological laws into human ritual. We anthropomorphize nature to make it emotionally legible. We give glaciers funerals, we speak of Mother Earth, we assign human traits to ecosystems to generate empathy. Yet empathy often emerges only when the non-human resembles the human. Sunnaura Taylor argues that domination is justified by ranking intelligence. This logic affects animals, ecosystems, and humans whose communication, mobility, or sensory experience differs from normative expectations. Anthony G. Nocella too notes that societies exclude the wild, the animalistic, and those with disabilities. Anthropomorphism can affect attention, but it can also reinforce the idea that value depends on resemblance to humans. Has colonialism truly ended? The way we speak about nature and about each other is shaped by colonial histories and sustained by capitalism system. Language reveals hierarchy. People insult others using names of diseases, disabilities, or animals. A person unable to move or speak may be called a vegetable. Animals perish while humans die. These linguistic habits normalize domination. Nocella writes that constructions of normalcy and civilization have been used for political power and social control. Colonial systems exported hierarchies of knowledge and value. Indigenous cosmologies grounded in reciprocity were replaced by ownership and extraction. We need new language, words not rooted in colonial hierarchies, to support relationships based on reciprocity and coexistence. Language does not simply describe reality, it shapes it. Body politics. The misuse of evolutionary theory contributed to the rise of eugenics. Francis Galton promoted selective breeding to eliminate those deemed unfit. Under Nazi rule, disabled children were among the first victims of euthanasia programs. Gas chambers were first tested on disabled people. Thousands were murdered, and no reparation were made. This history shows how hierarchies of value enable systematic violence. Environmental injustice follows similar patterns today. Toxic industries are disproportionately located in low-income and non-white communities. Russell and Stewart note that environmental racism forces communities to drink poisoned water and breathe polluted air, increasing rates of illness and disability. The 1984 biofuel gas disaster killed thousands and contaminated groundwater for decades, yet remains less recognized globally than Chernobyl. Environmental discrimination makes clean air and water a luxury, even though wealthier nations contribute most to pollution. Indigenous knowledge offer alternatives. Inuit cultures did not conceptualize land ownership. In Buryat, Mongolia, nature is understood as ancestral. One takes only what is needed and gives in return. These perspectives emphasize reciprocity rather than domination. rights of nature. How can we include modern human life in legal systems when many humans are still excluded from full participation? Disaster response system reveal the gap. Evacuation plans assume able-bodied mobility. People with disabilities face disproportional risk during climate disasters, not because of inherent vulnerability, but because infrastructures exclude them. The philosophy of eco-ability offers a framework grounded in interdependence. Eco-ability combines interdependency, inclusion, and respect for difference within community, including all life, sediment and non-sediment. Traditional social contracts assumed participation only by fully cooperative members of society. Children, people with cognitive disabilities, animals, and ecosystems are affected by decisions but excluded from participation. Global rights of nature movement are reshaping law. Ecuador recognized nature's rights. Bolivia adopted the law of Mother Earth. The Wanganui River has legal personhood. Rights of nature and disability justice share a foundation: recognition of difference and interdependence. Activism. Grassroots activism has become a powerful force for change. One of the most significant examples in Europe is the legal recognition of the Mar Menor lagoon in Spain. Through sustained civic mobilization, community organized, and legal advocacy, the lagoon was granted a legal personhood and right to protection, preservation, and restoration. This movement demonstrated that ecosystems can be defended and resources rights bearing entities. In 2025, Swiss authorities recognized the lagoon as a legal subject for the purpose of accessing environmental information. This decision showed that actually ecosystems rights can operate across borders, expanding the legal imagination beyond national frames. Activists transform grief into action and action into structural change. Community commitment can reshape law, redefine justice, and expand who and what is recognized as worthy of protection. Reclaiming identity. Modern systems have defined a human value through productivity. Under socialism and capitalism alike, economic output determines worth. Those unable to conform often struggle to survive. Fulched writes, disability is primarily a political construct rather than a medical phenomenon. This logic extends beyond humans. Land is valued for extraction. Mountains may be destroyed for minerals. Waterfalls dammed. Ecosystem judged by profit rather than integrity. Capitalism celebrates the independence and individualism, yet independence is a myth. We depend on microbes, ecosystems, infrastructure, and care networks. Donna Haraway reminds us, nothing makes itself. Earlings are never alone. Interdependence is the fundamental condition of life. Power of social art. Social art can reshape civic behavior by appealing to imagination rather than enforcement. In Bogota, Mayor Antanas Mokus dismissed the traffic police, widely associated with bribery, and replaced them with mimes who used humor and performance to guide drivers and pedestrians. The intervention captured public attention and helped reduce traffic fatalities by more than half. Its success was so striking that hundreds of additional citizens were later trained as memes, turning civic behavior into a shared cultural practice rather than a symbolic punishment. During a water shortage, monkeys appeared on television turning off the water while soaping. Citizens reduced water by 14%, eventually reaching a 40% reduction. Monkeys explained, knowledge empowers people. If people are sensitized by art, humor, and creativity, they are more likely to accept change. From reality to museum and public spaces. Art can document ecological crises, amplify community voices, and facilitate actions. Ala Plastica documented the Magdalena oil spill, making environmental damage visible. They produced photographs, notes, and other documentation from satellite imagery to maps to build the case for both repair to the ecosystem and reparation to the community. Carolina Saicedo River Book combines maps, images, poetry, and community materials gathered from regions affected by river privatization and industrial development in South America. It involves and honors local ecological knowledge. Socially engaged art prioritizes collaboration and participation rather than objects. It often resists commodification and function as social infrastructure. Artists and architects can design political processes, alternative economies, and cross-institutional collaboration. Changing policy is essential. Changing perception is equally necessary. Molly Fannon, a former CEO at the University of the United Nations, in the talk How Art and Activism Work Together with Kumi Naido and Olafur Eliasson said, the museum mission that I lead is not to display artwork or even to display culture. It's to galvanize everyday's agency that's innate in them, people, to take action towards a more hopeful future. The many people that in introspective have the capacity to make a difference in their local communities and therefore in the world at large. The question is how to make art and culture more present in policymaking and governance. This is necessary as it can have profound power to solve problems that might seem completely not connected with culture itself. Radical thinking and reimagining the future. Modern life has trained us to experience the world through screens, schedules, and infrastructures that separate us from the living systems that sustain us. Nature becomes background, scenery rather than relationship. If we continue to design the future using the same assumptions that produce ecological crisis and social exclusion, we will reproduce the same outcomes. Radical thinking beginning by questioning what we have been taught to accept as normal. In crossing boundaries between art, science, activism, and lived experience, because no single discipline can address interconnected crises alone. Alternative ways of living already exist, from ecological communities to mutual care networks. Yet sustainability without accessibility is not sustainability. Futures that exclude diverse bodies, minds, and ways of sensing are not livable futures. Radical thinking requires not only imagining different futures, but also practicing them. Artistic intervention. Scientific data alone often fails to produce emotional or behavioral change. Art create opportunities to relate to ecological transformation rather than merely observe it. One powerful example is Ruri's installation Future Cartography. Continuing her long-term exploration of future archaeology and planetary change, the work visualized impending shifts in Earth's surface caused by rising sea levels. The installation consists of maps depicting the future shorelines of Bangladesh, Egypt, and Iceland. Created in collaboration with geographer Gunnlaugur Einarsson, the drawings are based on public satellite data, including the NASA database. The map project shoreline changes resulting from the potential melting of the East Antarctic ice sheet. At first glance, the maps appear familiar, yet coastlines no longer align with present geography. The work confronts viewers with the future already encoded within scientific data. Olafur Eliasson and Minnie Grossing's Ice Watch transported glacier ice to urban spaces, allowing people to physically encounter melting ice and experience climate change through touch and presence. Such works shift perceptions from abstraction to embodying understanding. Artistic interventions invite us to move from observation to relationship, from extraction to attunement, from acceleration to present. Human time, peak time. In a culture driven by speed and productivity, slowing down to perceive transformation becomes a radical act. Rest resists systems demanding constant performance. People with disabilities have long navigated temporal expectations misaligned with their bodies. Their experiences reveal alternative rhythms of living that challenge the domination on productivity-driven time. Modern human beings operate within different temporalities and communication systems. Recognizing these differences expands ethical awareness. Understanding climate change requires confronting this temporal mismatch. To bridge this gap, one of Snæfellsjökul Forseta members, Konstantin Vlasis, created 2124, a data sonification work for percussive, rudiment, and glacier ice. Projection data mapping the future recession of Snæfellsjökul outlet glacier in southeast Iceland informs that even increasing tempo of composition, a repeating rhythm sticking pattern, LLR, LL, RRRR, 2124, repeats 1 year of glacier time. Each interaction equals 1 year. As the glacier retreats, the tempo accelerates. Listeners do not merely hear rhythm, they hear time speeding up. They hear climate change unfolding. Scientific projection becomes an embodied temporal experience. The piece incorporates layered recordings. The listener travels sonically from glacier surface into the ice body, through meltwater channels, into transformation from solid ice to liquid water. Snæfellsjökul Forseta invites participation to join Jökulskritt, Glacier Crowd, a collective slow walk through Reykjavik. In Icelandic, skrit refers to slow mass movement, a term glaciologists also use to describe glacier motion. Participants walk slowly through the city for an hour. Walking becomes listening, movement becomes awareness, slowness becomes resistance. And now I will talk a little bit about Snæfellsjökul Forseta, so Snæfellsjökul for President campaign. As you could see from Ole's presentation, Snæfellsjökul sits at the tip of Iceland's Snæfellsnes Peninsula, and it's visible to nearly half of the entire country population when it's good weather, of course. It is a glacier, volcano, watershed, mythic presence, and ecological system. To nominate the glacier for the president in 2024, founder of the Snæfellsjökul Forseta initiative, artist and poet Angela Snæfellsjökull Rawlings, undertook a striking legal and symbolic gesture to make the campaign possible within Icelandic electoral frameworks. They formally incorporate the glacier's name into their own legal name and use their national identification numbers to submit their candidacy. Because Icelandic election procedures require a registered individual to stand as a candidate, this act enables Snæfellsjökull to appear on the ballot as a legitimate write-in option. We collected 300 signatures. The gesture created a lawful pathway for citizens to cast votes for it. The Snæfellsjökul Forseta collective includes more than 50 individuals, artists, scientists, teachers, legal scholars, writers, eco-philosophers, and community members. Their work draws on life experience, indigenous knowledge, ecological science, folklore, and experimental listening practices. The role of Iceland's president is largely ceremonial, so a symbolic figure representing national unity and collective identity. The campaign asked, what if a glacier could represent nation? What if leadership embodied ecological interdependence rather than human dominance? Snæfellsjökull exemplifies how artistic, legal, and political strategies can converge to challenge anthropomorphic governance and expand political imagination. To collective reimagine the citizenship as relational rather than individual, and propose that citizenship should include entities that actually sustain life. Rather than anthropomorphizing nature, the campaign expands political space to include more than human forms of presence and agency. It invites us to imagine governance rooted in interdependence rather than hierarchy. During the campaign, the collective promotes embodied practices such as glacier choir and listening rituals. There were meetings with politicians, collecting signatures in public spaces, interviews, and press conference. It's all was led in 3 languages, including also the sound of Snæfellsjökull. To become with the glacier is to become closer to all water bodies. Accessibility, the flow. Joining the collective revealed a different kind of community, a community where disagreement exists, but dialogue and shared purpose remains. A community grounded in multidisciplinary collaboration and freedom of interpretation. The flow represents inclusion without exception. Actually, only then can the flow exist. It is collaboration rather than competition, sharing rather than hoarding knowledge, circulation between ecosystems, ideas, and communities. It is not only what to do, but mostly how. Thank you.
Thank you, Vena. It was very moving, and I think the artistic and activist perspective will take us very smoothly to our museum professionalists. It is my pleasure to introduce Anita Elefsen, who is the director of the Herring Era Museum in Siglufjörður, which is the Iceland's largest maritime and industrial museum. Anita holds degrees in history of museology from the University of Iceland, as has played a significant role in Icelandic and European museum networks. So let's welcome Anita.
Thank you everyone for having me, and thank you to everyone who has already given a lecture. I guess I will shift the focus a little bit more towards history and culture. They have been nature-based a little bit this morning. But like mentioned, my name is Anita and I work for the Herring Museum in Siglufjörður, north of Iceland. And a little bit about the museum. Like already mentioned, it is the largest maritime and industrial museum in the country. And we have over 2,500 square meters of exhibitions in 3 different buildings. So I did wonder a little bit if I should give you a general introduction of the museum this morning or not. So it will be a bit of a mix, but I thought it would be nice especially to focus on the boathouse, because there we focus on the harbor, the fisheries, and the very connected part of the water and the oceans to the history of the herring. Let me see. So Siglufjörður, the town that I live in and where the museum is based, has sometimes been called the world's most famous herring town. And the fact that we have the museum here is based on that fact, that here we used to have the center of the Icelandic fisheries. And the town gained nicknames such as the herring capital of the world, the Klondike of the Atlantic, fisherman's El Dorado, and so on. But we can trace the beginning back to the early 1900s, when Norwegians came here on their herring vessels in order to catch some herring. The reason they came over here is that the herring stocks migrate in between Iceland and Norway. So the Norwegians followed the herring over to Iceland and taught us more or less everything we were to know about fishing and processing. But at the time when they arrived in early 1900s, Siglufjörður, which is the northernmost town in Iceland, was hardly a town. It was more like a hamlet or a small village with 200 to 300 inhabitants. But after the arrival of the Norwegians and the start of the herring industry, the town grew very rapidly. The Norwegians brought work, knowledge, business, and they involved the locals. And very soon, salting stations, herring factories, homes, piers, and harbor infrastructure came to be. And only 50 years later, this small town actually became the 5th largest town in all of Iceland. To be the 5th largest town in the country back at those years, it was enough to have 3,100 inhabitants. But those people lived here all year round. But the herring season was quite short, I would say, relatively 3 months every year throughout the summer. And during the season, there usually were about 10 to 12,000 people here. Herring girls came from all across the country, as well as factory workers and harbor workers. The fishermen came from not only across Iceland, but very many from across Scandinavia. So the town quite early became diverse and gained rich culture. It flourished with work, export, social life, music, and romance on top of everything else. But herring became Iceland's biggest industry, with herring products producing over 44% of the total exports on the best seasons. In general, the herring was either salted or packed into barrels for human consumptions. And that was all done by the so-called herring girls. But also big parts of the fisheries were smelted in herring factories and turned into meal and oil. All of those were very valuable products, and Icelanders used the least of it for themselves. So most of it was exported to Europe and North America. But hundreds of vessels fished from Siglufjörður at summer. In the 1940s, for example, there were 260 Icelandic boats fishing from here, 130 Norwegian ones, plus many ships from Sweden, Finland, and other countries. And life in Siglufjörður pretty much revolved around the herring for about 65 years, from the early 1900s until 1969, when the herring stock collapsed due to overfishing. But a big history, as we say. After the collapse of the herring stocks in Siglufjörður, everything changed. We went from being a thriving town with booming industries to a so-called ghost town in just a few years, where the herring salting stations and herring factories had been left abandoned and piers remained unmaintained. And the pictures that you are about to show or see are all shot more or less from the same angle. So you can clearly see the difference from the peak of the herring years to what happened after the collapse of the stocks. But as we say, big history calls for great courage. The busy harbor that used to service up to 600 herring vessels throughout every season really kind of lost its charm and role. A few local fishermen still caught cod and haddock on their little boats, and a few bigger trawlers fished for capelin in the 1980s that was smelted in one of the local factories. But you can clearly see the change of atmosphere in the local port. We had about 120 companies salting and processing herring into barrels during the so-called high peak of the adventure. They stood side by side all along the shore, those companies, with over 40 piers for unloading fresh herring straight from the boats, and also 9 herring factories produced meat and oil during those years. In the 1980s, the view of the harbor was completely different from what it had been just decades before. But the boathouse is one of our 3 museum buildings open to visitors, and I want to share the story of how we organized it, designed it, and prepped it. The exhibition provides an impression of a typical North Iceland herring port during the period from around 1950. We have 12 boats of various types and sizes inside the building. We both have audio and visual material about the herring fisheries from 1938 on a very big ship sail inside the exhibition. We try to work with all the senses, eyesight, smell, hearing, and so on. And also in the lobby, we have an example of a fisherman's store, as well as smaller exhibitions on the harbor around the boats. We focus on marine research and how the herring skulls were located for the ships and boats to find them and bring them ashore. So I want to focus mostly about how this all came to be, how the ideas were formed, how the project grew. The designing changed a lot throughout the process, and it developed very rapidly. But this process, from the idea of the boathouse and how to tell the story of Icelandic herring fisheries after their collapse, it took about a decade from the first draft to the formal inauguration of the building. So pretty much we have a port without any water inside the building and try to have like a recreated world of what there once was. At the first stages, all kinds of possibilities were looked into. One of them was having an outdoor exhibition with the boats. It was quite likely to be the easiest choice to get into action because funding was a challenge. So by having the boats outside, there was no need for large funds or constructions, but on the other hand, it would have required a lot of maintenance, repairing, and renovation each year, especially due to our very diverse weather conditions here in Iceland. So quite soon, the possibility of an outdoor preservation was put off the table, since it was thought to be more of a short-term solution that would grow into a long-run problem at a short-staffed museum. But the first ideas were aimed to use and work with the premises that and spaces that the museum already owned. One of them was this small warehouse from 1930. It is a little over 200 square meters, and that would have been the maximum capacity of exhibiting and preserving only 4 smaller boats. That was not thought to be enough, because it would have only been the smaller versions of the boats that were used to carry the nets and so on, and an actual herring vessel would not have fitted into the building. So in 1997, almost 5 years later, still drawing, still brainstorming, still trying to puzzle. So the ideas kept growing, and it was found that an actual herring vessel needed to be a part of the exhibition in order to tell the story at face value. So ideas were still limited to the low budget of the museum, whose in those years was mainly run by volunteers. The director was the only staffed member, and the museum board was volunteered as well. So we actually had to search for a herring vessel for the future exhibition, and it was not an easy task. So many of those boats had been burned or disposed of in the late 1980s, and many had been standing on shore for years, leading to them being in very poor condition. The search stretched all across Iceland. It was not just a local search, and eventually Týr, the one you see on the picture over there, it was found. It's a 38-ton oak boat built in Fáskrúðsfjörður, east of Iceland in 1946. And it is one of many vessels constructed as part of the post-war government's efforts to boost the economy. It was originally named Skrúður, then Hrafn, and finally Týr. And the boat was fishing from Sauðárkrókur, which is not very far from here, about 1 hour by road, from 1967. Which is when the herring industry collapsed. So they shifted over to cod fisheries and used it all the way up until 1988, which is mostly the reason for it being in not worse condition than it was. But now that we had found our herring vessel, the museum director, Örlygur, at the time, drew another draft of the exhibition. It was quite lucky that Örlygur was and is an educated artist, so therefore he did not have problems making his ideas visual on paper, especially for those who we needed to convince of funding and getting people on board, more or less. So here you can see that the idea had more or less transformed a little bit from the original drafts, but still this was not thought to be quite enough. So in 2000, the idea still kept on expanding, and the ideas of the house were somehow getting closer to the final result. Another herring vessel had been added to the exhibition, and the house grew bigger every time new ideas were laid forward. But here you can see how 6 boats were meant to be a part of the exhibition, and this idea is from around the year 2000. There were 2 herring vessels, 3 purse-seine boats, and a smaller fishing boats. And also ideas about building replicas of piers around the boats were implemented. But it wasn't just the exhibition itself that we needed to think about, because how was this house supposed to look? What kind of design would best fit the boats? What would be financially manageable for this small museum at the northernmost point of Iceland? And here you see the first drafts, an almost 800 square meter warehouse covered with corrugated iron, a rather industrial-like building with little charm, I allow myself to say. So a decision was made to look for professional advice on the design of the building itself. And Árni Páll Jóhannsson, an Icelandic set designer, brought this idea to the museum board and its director. It is quite a lot of change from the corrugated iron warehouse that I just showed you. It's a wooden building with a frame of laminated wood, over 1,000 square meters, and considerably quite a lot more expensive to construct than the warehouse. When the museum's director reviewed the drawings from Árni, he was immediately convinced that the right solution had been found. So a decision was made to build this exact house and adjust the exhibition to the premises. It was not just Árni Páll who helped out with the designing. Also, we got a set designer, Sigurjón Jóhannsson, who was born and raised in Siglufjörður during the herring years, to help making a model of the exhibition and how to puzzle the boats and ships inside. So here you can see the ideas of the exhibition and how they kept evolving, and the concept grew bigger and expanded to thinking about the whole harbor, the herring port and its long gone charm. So in ways, we ended up with something maybe resembling to a theater set. So our ideas and designs of the exhibitions are here tailored to the house and its features. The boats are now lying half sideways inside the building. Piers were planned to be built around the house and right through the middle of it as well, from one corner to the opposite one. And also smaller detailed exhibitions were made possible in the lobby by the entrance, and also here and there around the exhibition itself. The space really did provide new opportunities, leading to an example of an Icelandic fisherman's store coming to be in the lobby, as well as the smaller ones who we somehow are able to show people sneak peeks of what they might have come across walking around the local herring port back in 1950. The boathouse had grown so dramatically from the original ideas by the time that it was built. By square meters, it had five-folded and grown over 400%. So with extensive coverage of the herring fisheries, the port somehow became an indoor example and an opportunity to recreate an example of a long-gone reality was somehow in our hands. And it really was an exciting project. I was lucky enough to partly be a part of it. I was quite young at the time, but I was part of the summer staff, still a student when this was ongoing. And it was really amazing how we managed to make this happen, even though the planning and organizing took a very long time. Then the construction itself took less than 1 year. It was so well laid out and organized that from when we started constructing the building itself and to when it was open to visitors was less than 12 months. It was hard work, but very, very interesting to be a part of, and also to see how it really has developed in the decades since it was opened. So we built the foundations in 2001. And once that was ready, the boats needed to be brought to their last destination, because there is no way in the world to fit the boats inside the building after it had been built, possibly by removing the roof or going through something very dramatic. So it was figured to put the boats in place before actually building the house. And as you can see, we only made concrete foundations. The floor is still just natural grounds, and that is to keep the boats and ships as humid and moist as possible so that they feel well in there, even though they are not floating, as would be the best. So Týr came sailing to Siglufjörður on a cargo ship, looking so tiny amongst all the containers. You maybe can spot it there on board. But it did not look so tiny when we had to drive it around the town streets on a trailer from the harbor and to the house's foundations, where everything had been calculated and thought of. So both Týr and Draupnir, who are the biggest boats inside the exhibitions and both original herring vessels, along with some of the smaller purseine boats, had found their final home port at last. And after the boats had been located on the exact spots they were meant to stay, hopefully for the rest of their days, the house's frame was put up and the house itself then constructed and built around the boats and ships. And you can see Örlygur, the former director there, very proud, overlooking the boats being placed in their last destination. I do find it very important to mention the valuable contribution of our volunteers, because the Herring Museum in general would not exist if not for local volunteers. In the late 1980s, a small group of locals who had a clear vision of what needed to be done in order to preserve the town's history and the history of the herring in general formed an association with the aim of building up a museum here. Their first task was to renovate Roaldsbrakki, a Norwegian salting station from 1907. But next up was collecting machinery for Grana, the second museum building, which tells the story of the herring meal and oil industry. And then when it came to the boats, their contribution was no less than it had been in the past decade. And without these amazing people, none of this would have been possible at all. So alongside the volunteers and their contribution, the construction of the boathouse received financial support from the Icelandic state, from our local municipality, and also from the neighboring municipality of Skagafjörður, and also from the National Association of Icelandic Fisheries. So this really was a big project, and there was help from all kinds of different directions. So once everything was ready, we had this big festival in 2004 to inaugurate the building, and it was Håkon Magnus, the Crown Prince of Norway, who came here as the first official guest and the one who inaugurated the building. And that was to be shown as a symbol of Iceland's common history with Norway when it comes to the herring industry. And this really was a very large day in our museum's history, with both the Crown Prince of Norway and the President of Iceland being here. Thousands of people came to visit the museum that summer in order to see the new boathouse, something so different from what other museums in the country and maybe even the world had done in the past. So we can say that the house itself, the exhibition, the preservation and restoration of the boats is an ongoing project still today, all these years later. It has now been 22 years this summer since we inaugurated the building. But since the house was formally opened and inaugurated, very much somehow changed, especially regarding the boats and the ships. Before the house was built, the boats that belonged to the museum were all dried. They were all ashore under bare sky, and a decision was made on not having an indoor heating system because we felt we would shock them too much by putting them into too warm and nice conditions, and it would not be very good for neither the wood nor the iron parts. So a special operating system for controlling humidity and temperature was way too expensive to install for this small museum when the house was constructed. So we decided to do, like I mentioned, no concrete floors, just the natural ground underneath the boats and no heating inside the building. So the average humidity inside is usually close to 80%. It does vary a little bit by seasons, of course, but it's mostly the temperature. We do somehow manage to keep it very humid. And this seems to work very well. We see now, 20 years later, the boats are still in excellent condition. We even do allow visitors to go on board the largest one, walk around the deck up to the wheelhouse and explore. And the boat carries it very, very well. So Tyr, the biggest one, it has undergone massive repairs and, like I said, is accessible to visitors now. And that really is an important part, we find, for our visitors to actually somehow experience and almost touch on history as they go through the exhibition. We feel that it gives an additional understanding to the history, and it really promotes people's interest and curiosity about the herring era and about life at sea, fishing techniques, and so on. And the purse seine boats and some of the smaller rowing boats have also undergone repair and renovations, but none of the smaller ones are accessible to visitor to step on board. They are solely for display. And still, there are many, many tasks and projects that await, as I guess always, because you never really are finished with your to-do list when working in a museum. And we really have a dream to also have Draupnir, the smaller one closer to us in the picture, accessible to visitors. But unfortunately today, the biggest challenge is to find skilled people to do this work because we do not have many boat builders left here in Iceland. But like I mentioned at the beginning, the exhibition provides an impression of a typical North Iceland herring port during the period from around 1950. We do have a total of 12 boats and ships inside the building lying at the dock, and our aim is that our visitors feel like they somehow can have a sneak peek back in time, that they can sense the long gone atmosphere. When walking around the building, there are no written texts, no signs, or we really want to just have people somehow experience history. They will hear the dull sounds of waves, of the ocean, of seagulls, of boat engines, also some romantic fisherman songs every now and then. So we really hope that an aim for our visitors to somehow feel like they are stepping back in time for a short moment when they visit. So I think it's fair to say that the final product or final layout is the result of very good collaboration of three men. Örlygur, the former director, who developed the idea for years and really is the mastermind behind the exhibition. Sigurjón, who made the model, changed the locations and positions of the boats and made some additional changes. And then finally the house itself, which is a design from Árni Páll. I do think it's safe to say that the boathouse really is exceptional. The idea is completely homemade, as we can say. But of course, many museums have exhibited boats and ships, but to our knowledge, none have done it the way that we do in the boathouse, where the aim is to recreate an example of the port itself and give our visitors an opportunity of an even greater understanding somehow of everything. We try to have each and every object in its right context, and really no single one object is more important than the other in puzzling together the whole picture for the exhibition. But another fun fact is that this building turned out to really be an excellent concert venue. The acoustics are fantastic inside the building, most likely due to the fact that it's more or less all wood. So it has become very popular for not only Icelandic, but also international artists to perform here. So the biggest boat, Týr, becomes the stage. So that is where we have musicians standing to perform. And then around the piers, we place chairs and benches. And we do have the capacity to have about 300 people seated on a live concert. So it somehow turned out to be a multifunction house, but its first and foremost role is to preserve and display the boats and every other artifact inside the exhibition. But it also has become a culturally important building in our very small society of Siglufjörður with just about 1,200 inhabitants. So concerts, lectures, theater plays, and weddings have happened inside the building, just to name a few. So I want to thank you all very much for listening.
Oh, thank you, Anita. I have to confirm, I'm lucky to confirm that the museum is amazing. Our ethnographic team had opportunity to visit it last year. So yes, it's amazing, and it's touching to see all the things that you did and all the team did for preserving this intangible heritage. And although we are quite far from Gdańsk and Siglufjörður from each other, the herring are connecting us, because the herring culture and the fishery culture is also very unique for the region that we are in. So thank you very much. And now our last lecturer, I would like to introduce Hjordis Pálsdóttir, the director of the Norwegian House, the Regional Museum of Snæfellsnes, and the Library of Water in Stykkishólmur. Raised in the region, she combines ethnology and applied culture studies with deep local engagement.
Before I start my presentation, I just want to tell you a bit of a coincidence that Anita was talking about Árni Páll Jóhannesson, because Árni Páll was from Stykkishólmur. And his dad actually was quite, I think probably has given most of the items to the museum as at the beginning years. And just before I start, I wanted to show you something. So here he actually is when they were starting renovating the house, the museum, the Norwegian house. And he was giving them a lot of information because he had written so much about the house in the old days. So he was helping them making it look like it used to. And here is all of the items that he gave the museum. There's so many. Yeah, so my name is Hjördís and I'm the museum director of the Norwegian House. And the Norwegian House is the regional museum of Snæfellsnes. And they also direct the Library of Water. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the museums. So the Norwegian House was built in 1832. And it was the first wood frame residence with 2 full-size stories in Iceland. And the wood was imported from Norway. And it was the home of Árni Thorlacius and his wife Anna Sandberg and their children. And it has been renovated partially back to its original style. And it serves as the regional museum for Snæfellsnes area with different kind of exhibition, as well as a museum shop with Icelandic design and handicraft from the area. Árni Thorlacius, he was of a wealthy family. So his dad, Ólafur Thorlacius, he was the first man in Iceland to outboard cod and got very wealthy from that. Árni received a good education in Denmark and in Norway, though not the conventional classical education of the time. Instead, he studied commerce, modern languages, navigation, and so on. And during his years in Stykkishólmur, he engaged in trade and operated fishing vessels. But after some years, he withdrew from these fields to devote himself to agriculture. So he owned a large estate outside Stykkishólmur, and for several decades he was the agent for the Danish king, since Iceland was under the Danish king at this time. And he collected the rents of farms which had come into royal possession. He was a man of outstanding abilities, an excellent seal hunter, a talented athlete and a swimmer, and a fine marksman. But Árni is, however, remembered chiefly for his meteorological observation, which he carried out for about half a century, from 1845. He ordered the necessary equipment from abroad and recorded his reading on special forms. And the accuracy of his observation is remarkable, and these have proved useful to modern scientists in studying long-term climatic developments. Árni probably began his weather observation as a result of his keen interest in all aspects of seamanship. And he is reputed to have run seaman's training school, although no written evidence of that exists. In 2019, a plaque of recognition from the World Meteorological Organization was unveiled for more than 100 years of continuous measurements in Stykkishólmur. The plaque was installed at the Norwegian House. Árni began his observation in November 1845, and since that day, the meteorological staff of Icelandic Meteorological Office in Stykkishólmur have delinquently recorded observation for continuous 180 years. The house was owned by Árni's family until the end of 19th century, and Árni and Anna lived there for the rest of their lives. They moved there 1832, and Árni died in 1891. Over the 20th century, the house changed owner several times and served as both a resident and commercial building. Among other things, it housed a sewing studio, a shop, and a guest house. But for a while, it was also an apartment building. There lived like 3 or 4 families at the same time. In 1970, the Snæfellsnes County Council decided to buy the Norwegian House to make it, to restore it and make it a regional museum. And it was decided to make the upper floor and the attic of the house as close to original image as possible. And after the first part of the construction was completed, and it was completed in 1987, the first floor of the building was actually a caretaker's apartment. So the first museum director lived there. There was an exhibition space and a storage, but today downstairs there's exhibition room, small storage shop and the office, and in the middle floor we have our main exhibition. And the items from the museum has been collected since 1956. And in 2001, an exhibition was opened at the museum on a life on an upper-class Icelandic village home based on what was known of home life of Árni and Anna. But around 2019, we decided to change the exhibition since this exhibition had been up for a long time. And now actually Árni and Anna have a smaller exhibition downstairs. And in the fall 2023, the museum opened a new main exhibition that is called Place of the Heart, the horizon with eyes of young people in Snæfellsnes since 1900. And the exhibition explores how young people have experienced and shaped life in Snæfellsnes over the past century through personal stories, historical events, and cultural shift. The exhibition reveals also the deep connection between youth and their home. And now, last Saturday, 14th of February, we opened the attic also after some changes. And now there is an exhibition there about turf houses in Snæfellsnes. And on the ground floor, we have our museum shop, Árni and Anna's room, and an area for changing exhibition. And we have 6 to 8 different kinds of exhibition there over the year. Our main event is the National Costume Day that we have had since 2005. And that is held in the last weekend in June every year. And then here's some photos from the summer exhibition, from 2024 and 2025. And the museum is open from February until December. And our staff is me, the museum director, in 100% job, and the registration of the collection is 50% job, as well as summer staff. And now I'm going to tell you about the Library of Water. It's an installation artwork made by American artist Ronnie Horn, and it's located in Stykkishólmur also. And it's at the highest point of town, with a panoramic views in all directions. The building was built in the 60s and used to be our library. But in 2007, it was transformed into a museum of water, words, and weather narratives. Among the features of the museum are 24 glass columns containing water from the country's major glaciers. One of them, which is now gone, as you said, it came earlier, called Oak. And for the past 14 years, the work of American artist Ronnie Holmes has been intimately involved with geography, geology, climate, and culture of Iceland. Horn has created a long-term installation which connects the inside to the outside and incorporates many of the Horn's abiding concerns with weather, water, words, and identities. The artist has described the place as a lighthouse in which the viewer becomes the light. So in the main view room, she has placed a constellation as glass columns. And for example, the water there is from Vatnajökull, Hofsjökull, Langjökull, and Snæfellsjökul. And through watery columns, natural light is reflected onto special kind of words on the floor that inscribes the weather, both in Icelandic and English. And as an extra part to the Library of Water, Horn has instated ongoing project Weather Report You, based on gathering of stories. So at the museum, there's a book with stories that she gathered from people of Stykkishólmur, asking them about memories of the weather in the town. And this fall in October, we had a symposium held to mark the 180th anniversary of continuous meteorological observation by Árni and Stykkishólmur. And also there was an exhibition to remark this occasion. The exhibition was called Tipping Point. And yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Hjördís. We're also very lucky to visit both the Norwegian House and the Library of Water, and it's very inspiring. We hope to visit you in the future also. Thank you very much. So this is our last speaker. This is our last lecture. Thank you to all the speakers for the inspiring contributions. Thank you to all our audience for being part of this shared reflection. I think that today we have seen that the water circulates not only through ecosystems, but also through economies, histories, bodies, and ideas. We hope that this conversation continues beyond today's webinar in research, collaboration, well, maybe in our everyday practices. So thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for all the things that you just gave us from your perspectives. Thank you.